The Salem witch trials have been portrayed often in pop culture and literature, appearing in many novels, films, television programs, ballets, operas, and plays. And we're going to talk to you about one of those productions today on The Thing About Salem. I'm Josh Hutchinson.
I'm Sarah Jack. Our ancestors experienced the real Salem witch trials and were characters in the Crucible. The past doesn't simply fade away. It lives in our cultural DNA, whispering through our institutions and echoing in our most heated moments of moral panic. We carry Salem in our bones, its fears, its judgment, its certainty, still shaping how we respond when communities face the unknown. What burns from centuries ago still casts light on who we choose to become.
The Crucible is a play by Arthur Miller, Pulitzer-winning playwright who also wrote Death of a Salesman. And The Crucible first appeared in theater on January 10th, 1953. So 72 years ago, and it's still being performed worldwide, everywhere. The Crucible is a dramatized and fictionalized story of the Salem witch trials that took place in the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1692 and 1693. And Arthur Miller got a lot of information on the Salem witch trials from Marion Starkey's 1949 book, The Devil in Massachusetts.
To fully grasp the purpose of the Crucible and the arc of the story, you have to be familiar with the McCarthy trials. You have to have a grasp of that history to really see the allegorical meaning. Like witch trials, the McCarthy trials are made up of individuals, and their stories of accusations and injustice are unique.
The Salem witch trials and all of this Red Scare stuff that was going on in the late 40s and early 50s, they're both based on the fear of an existential threat to the country itself. In the Salem witch trials, it was a fear that Massachusetts Bay Colony and the Puritan experiment in New England would be defeated by the devil. And with the McCarthy hearings and Red Scare, it was that the United States was going to be defeated by its new rival on the world stage, the USSR, Soviet Union, and communism. And the fear you had, on the one hand, witches infiltrating the godly churches of New England, and you have communists infiltrating the government of the United States, and they both seek the utter ruin and overthrowing of the established order. And both of these things, the Red Scare, McCarthy hearings, and the Salem witch trials, have in common this thread of injustice, of innocents being accused of crimes that they did not, and in many cases could not possibly commit. So you have the crime of witchcraft, which is an impossible crime to prove in court because it's an invisible crime if it's a crime at all. And you have the Red Scare, and you have, a handful of communists like Alger Hiss that were really on Soviet payroll. But otherwise, it's really overblown and exaggerated what a threat the communists that were active in America at the time actually posed.
The Crucible is widely seen through live theater, multiple film and television adaptations. My favorite's the 1967 film of the play. It's also satirized in Witches in Salem, and it's evaluated in John Proctor as the villain, which is a current play.
The Crucible is also a staple of high school literature classes and theater dramatizations. I highly recommend this play to high schools and community theater groups, anybody who's going to put on a play. This is a really great one to get going with. It's timeless. There's a lot that's good about it. We sometimes hear historians talk about the inaccuracies in it, but I want to talk first about the accuracies in it. Now, Governor Danforth didn't really lead the trials. He got involved at a much later point and wasn't the leader. That was Chief Justice William Stoughton. But Danforth's attitude in the Crucible really matches Stoughton and the other judges' attitudes in the Salem witch trials. In the Crucible, Danforth says, the devil will not rule over 1 single inch of Massachusetts. And that's really talking about this fear that the devil was going to take over the colony, that they had to do anything that they could to protect the colony. For the sake of a good dramatization, there's changes in the play, but the overall sentiment, the emotions, the feelings that people got when they were accused and when they were being prosecuted, the courtroom that was so crowded and packed full of onlookers, the antics of the afflicted girls.
And the reasons for the accusations, there are matches there. Not all of them. Not the main accusation against John Proctor. That isn't. But illness, the death of babies, and questioning the piety and the faithfulness of church members. That matches.
That matches the arguments with neighbors over animals getting into your kitchen garden and eating your food. Those were big things.
A huge misconception that has flooded our perceptions from the Crucible is that the confessions of guilt spared lives. In reality, that isn't true.
No, actually, we know for a fact that people who confessed were eventually condemned and were set to be executed on about February 1st, 1693. So confessing might have prolonged your life by a few months because you were needed to testify against others. And that's where Arthur Miller takes this thread of naming names. It's in the Red Scare McCarthy hearings to save yourself from government prosecution. You name names, you cooperate with the government. And in the Salem witch trials, there's this misconception, as you mentioned, that people could save their lives by naming other people as witches. And that just isn't true.
The world is still fascinated with the Crucible because it opens with witchcraft in the film.
And in the play, it opens with Betty Paris in bed and people praying over her. But the dialogue in that opening act reveals this magical scene with Tituba that we know didn't happen in real life. Another reason we're still fascinated is that the afflictions that are dramatized in the Crucible are so scary. How would you react if you saw children behaving that way?
We're also fascinated that confession of guilt could get you off the hook, and who is willing to lie to save their own life. John Proctor's confession is exceptionally moving.
Yes. And when John Proctor he signs the confession and then they want to post it on the church door so everybody in the village can see it. And John gets really intense and cannot have that because the value of somebody's name at this point in time, especially, was so important. If there was any damage to your reputation, you were ruined because nobody would want to trade with you, do business with you of any kind, and you could not survive in the early American colonies on your own very easily because you could not provide every single thing that you needed out of your own farm. You needed people to trust you. And John, what he says at this point is, because it is my name, because I cannot have another in my life, because I lie and sign myself to lies, because I am not worth the dust on the feet of them that hang. How may I live without my name? I have given you my soul. Leave me my name.
The aftermath of both of these histories have some comparisons too. The branding of evil and the blacklisting. The accused witches had to face the court at a special convened court, the Oyer-Terminer Court. With the Red Scare, there were special committees. House Un-American Activities Committee. Communism rejects religion. Witches reject Christianity.
I'm going to give you a quote from Joseph R. McCarthy himself that really, to me, speaks to both Salem and the Red Scare. He says, "Today we are engaged in a final all-out battle between communistic atheism and Christianity. The modern champions of communism have selected this as the time. And ladies and gentlemen, the chips are down. They are truly down." This final all-out battle between atheism and Christianity is like the battle between diabolism and Christianity that people like Cotton Mather thought they were waging during the Salem witch trials, that this was almost the end times, an apocalyptic kind of tragedy that was unfolding before them that could end their very existence. Another parallel I'd like to draw between the Red Scare and the Salem witch trials is the power of the media in both. Now, you don't really think about that when you think about the Salem witch trials usually, but Cotton Mather, Increase Mather, other ministers loved to write stories about witchcraft, ghosts, other supernatural encounters that were reported in the 17th century. Cotton Mather had written a book called Memorable Providences, published in 1689, that talked about the Goody Glover case in Boston in 1688, involving the Goodwin children who were afflicted and behaved in ways that later the Salem witch trial behaved similarly to the Goodwin children. Basically, it was a mirror image. They were the same. And that was spread through the media, and then people reading this at their homes, edifying their children that you have to know what witchcraft looks like so you can combat it with the community. But it fed into their minds and their psyches this image of what it's like to be bewitched. And that showed itself once they started to believe that they were afflicted. And then with the McCarthy scare, you had anti-communist media just repeating what McCarthy and the others were saying. So it can fan the flames, or it can also suppress panics.
Josh, like you said, in both instances, there were people fanning the flames, but also speaking out about the injustice. During the McCarthy hearings, one of the press that was speaking out and sticking their neck out, although there were lots of others too, is Ed Murrow. And right now, a version of that story is on Broadway. There was a movie, First, Good Night and Good Luck. And right now it's on Broadway. And you might have caught the live streaming of that Broadway production on June 7th on CNN.com. One of Ed Murrow's quotes that I find significant is when he said, "We can deny our heritage and our history, but we cannot escape responsibility for the result." And who can deny that we are not escaping the results of her history? There will be an extended version of this episode available to our Patreon members. Thank you for considering these comparisons with us today. Good night.
And good luck.